Hello, everyone. I'm Daryl Kimball. I'm Executive Director of the Arms Control Association, and I want to welcome everybody to today's 2020 annual meeting. When we had to postpone our annual meeting last spring because of the pandemic, we could hardly have imagined how 2020 would go and how difficult and challenging and tragic and how stressful a year it would be. So we're very glad to have all of you with us here today. We thank you for your interest and your support, and we wish you and yours the best of health in the weeks and the months ahead. Now, as 2020 finally comes to an end, as we get ready for 2021, we have a chance to turn the page on some important arms control matters. The election of Joe Biden certainly creates the potential for significant progress. And just as he is going to need to take dramatic steps to combat climate change, to help advance racial and economic justice, to fight the COVID pandemic, the new administration is going to need to pursue some immediate, smart, and bold actions in order to get us back on track to reducing the nuclear threat and back on track to the pursuit of a world without nuclear weapons. Their actions and the efforts that all of us take to help influence their actions and decisions are going to shape the international landscape for the next decade. And at today's conference, we have some great speakers who are going to be exploring some of the biggest challenges ahead of us. We're going to start with an opening address. We're going to ask you to take an online poll. We'll have panel discussion on diversifying and strengthening the nuclear disarmament movement, which I'm really looking forward to. And then we're going to have several issue-specific breakout sessions that you can choose from. Then towards the end of our meeting, we're going to hear from UN Undersecretary for Disarmament Affairs, Izumi Nakamitsu. And we're also going to be hearing from Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York, who's going to deliver our closing address on how we can restore U.S. arms control leadership. Let me just turn straight to our next speaker, who is Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon, a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, who's been kind enough to take some time out of his schedule to help us look at some of the issues that the new administration and the new Congress are going to be dealing with in the first several weeks and months of the year. And Senator Merkley, we look forward to hearing your thoughts this morning.
Hi, greetings everyone. Daryl, it's very good to be with you. Thank you so much to the Arms Control Association for the dialogue that you conduct on this incredibly important topic and for inviting me to join you at this year's annual meeting. You've all been involved in this effort since the early 1970s, 71. And I was thinking about how my real introduction to the issue of nuclear arms control was in 1973, 74, when I participated in college in a simulation of SALT II talks. And in this seminar, we divided into Russians and into Americans and tried to work out all the set of issues that needed to be dealt with. That was really kind of out of sync with the rest of my undergraduate education because I was focused on third world economic development, spending time in villages in Mexico and in India, had been in West Africa. And indeed, when I got out of graduate school, I fully intended to be spending my life overseas working on issues of world poverty. But I was at the World Bank, so 1982 at the World Bank, and preparing to head to Africa when the Reagan administration, Secretary Weinberger's team, hired me as a presidential management fellow to work on strategic nuclear policy. Very unexpected turn of events. I really wrestled with whether to take that role because it hadn't been what I had been focused on through my undergraduate and graduate work, but I took it because I considered nuclear proliferation and the hair-trigger relationship with the then Soviet Union as the biggest threat facing humankind on our planet. And I felt an obligation to throw myself into that. And so from 83 on through 91, when I left to go back to Oregon, I was deeply engaged in that topic. First there with Secretary Weinberger and then working for Congress writing studies on strategic nuclear weapon options. I think about how at that time, the Doomsday Clock was 4 minutes to midnight. Just a way of summing up how dangerous it was in the world that we had these huge nuclear inventories that could destroy each other's countries and much of the world with it. If we can even go back to the early 60s, remember President Kennedy's quote, "Every man, woman, and child lives under a nuclear sword of Damocles, hanging by the slenderest of threads, capable of being cut at any moment by accident or miscalculation or by madness." So this is a challenge that humankind has to manage from here to eternity. And that is an enormous challenge for us. And I think these last 4 years have been ones in which Donald Trump and his team have heightened the risk of accident, miscalculation, or madness, as Kennedy put it, that could lead to calamity. And now we have an opportunity for a pivot, an opportunity to have a different team in charge that takes these risks and the management of them very, very seriously. What are we going to see in this time to come? By the way, I can tell you that we are now, and going back to that Doomsday Clock, it is pegged by the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists at now 100 seconds. It was 4 minutes when I first went to work for the Reagan administration. It was 17 minutes to midnight when I left to go back to Oregon 8 years later. And so that was a big improvement, massive improvement. And yet now we're in a much more dangerous place. And what happened during those years from 83 through 93, that decade, that was a whole series of agreements and conversations that led to a more stable place. Well, we had the 1991 announcement by the Soviet Union that they were going to end tests. We had the 1991 Start One agreement. We had the 92 agreement, in which, or not agreement, when the U.S. conducted its last nuclear test. We had the 92 Open Skies agreement. We had the 93 Start Two. We led up to the mid-90s with the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, which the U.S. has never ratified. So that time period was a period where intensive attention led us to a much better place. And I think we're at a moment now where we need intensive attention that will lead us to a better place. Some of the challenges we face. Well, in terms of nuclear proliferation, we have the issue of how we come back together with the world to try to restore the fabric of the agreement with Iran, the JCPOA. Certainly what has happened in our abandonment of that is that it has strengthened the hardliners in Iran, and it has hurt the role of U.S. leadership, because the U.S. led that effort to bring the international collection of countries together to create the sort of pressure on Iran, to drive that conversation, to have them make enormous decisions about how to curtail their nuclear program, how to shut down and dismantle their plutonium reactor, how to get rid of a lot of their enriched uranium, and so forth. Those were very hard things for the leadership of Iran to do. And that very successful effort has been dismantled. So we're in that place. On North Korea, well, we do have to recognize that the pressure brought to bear on North Korea, they have restrained their testing of nuclear warheads and of ICBMs, but they have tested other missiles, and they have continued apace to develop their nuclear weapons program. All kinds of information flowing out of North Korea in regards to that ongoing effort, including their recent parade showcasing what some say may be the world's largest liquid-fueled ICBM in the world. We have the INF Treaty, which in February of last year, 2019, we suspended it, and then we withdrew in August. We have the Open Skies Treaty, which just a week and a half ago, the United States withdrew from. A treaty that provided kind of a symbol of transparency and confidence-building measures of dialogue with Russia. And in that sense, it was a valuable part of the framework. We all recognize that satellite intelligence is in a very different place now than when Open Skies was passed, but still, it was at least a building block in a conversation with Russia about risks, and a chance, if you saw things that bothered you from those flights, you could then check them out with satellite intelligence. You could have a conversation with the other side, what's going on. So again, contributing to the confidence of each side. And then we have New Start. Well, so here we are. The Trump administration spent 3 years just ignoring New Start. Then they spent a year in which they sought a short-term extension, but didn't get the deal done. And so here we are, Doomsday Clock, 100 seconds to midnight. I should probably note that that clock now is based not just on one risk to the planet, nuclear war, but also on a second risk to the planet, which is climate chaos. So the Biden administration comes in, and the first thing they're going to face is the February 5th deadline for the extension of New Start. And I guess it's worth recapping for a moment the conversation that took place with the administration. They kept saying, we aren't going to engage in an extension unless we can bring China into that conversation. China, which has a very small nuclear force compared to Russia or the United States. And so I asked the administration a number of times, but asked them publicly last year when Christopher Ford, Assistant Secretary of State, was testifying before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. I said, so what is your vision here? Is your vision, your game plan, that you want Russia and the United States to come down to the levels that China has? Or is your argument you want to give China permission to come up to the level of Russia and the United States? And their answer was, well, we haven't figured that out yet. And it just struck me as so irresponsible to keep saying we can't go forward with a conversation with Russia because China has weapons, and yet they had no vision of where they wanted to take that. Meanwhile, another argument was, well, Russia has these new weapons they're working on. They have their hypersonic glide weapon, the Avangard. They have their air-launched ballistic missile, the Sarmat. Yes, but Russia has said that those would be covered by the existing New Start rules for vehicles and warheads. Well, the administration noted they're working on their nuclear-powered cruise missile, Skyfall, and they're working on those nuclear torpedoes from drone subs, the Poseidon. Yes, but the development frame for those is much longer than a 5-year extension of New Start. Meanwhile, the U.S. has so many weapon strategies under development. A new ICBM, the ground-based strategic deterrent. A new submarine ballistic missile launcher, the Columbia class. A new bomber, the B-21. A new air-launched cruise missile, long-range standoff. A new sea-launched cruise missile. Rebuilding command and control, and then a host of programs related to warheads, including ones that raise significant issues, like a submarine-launched ballistic missile warhead at a much lower yield that certainly is worthy of discussion in the context of the risks it creates and impacts upon deterrence. And then we have several other warheads. We have also the expanded plutonium pit program. All in all, we're talking about a $2 trillion program. Now, as we think about our role in the world and the nuclear weapons of the world and the management of them, we have this foundation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And the premise of that is that those nuclear weapon states will do everything they can to reduce their inventories and aim towards the elimination of nuclear weapons, while the rest of the world restrains themselves from developing nuclear weapons. Well, that contract is strained enormously if we're engaged in massive developments in our nuclear program, rather than aiming for reductions and retirement. It does do damage to the integrity of the vision, and it also is an extraordinarily expensive undertaking at a time when the United States is following behind the world on housing and healthcare and education and infrastructure and living wage jobs. So we have to realize there is a monetary cost, but there is also a cost to our leadership in working with the world to manage this enormous threat. Well, there are things that the new administration will have to do. They'll have to do a top to bottom review of these programs and think about them in the context both of the overall vision of the management of nuclear weapons on our planet, but also in terms of the US budget, which will be stretched for sure. They also should be thinking about things like, is it really time for us to have a no first use position, a public position, no first use? I believe that it is. I think that it contributes to the vision of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. I think it contributes to the understanding that we have high confidence in our ability to retaliate if we were ever attacked. And I think it creates a line between non-nuclear weapons and nuclear weapons. The argument for not having such a policy is sometimes put forward as saying, well, in a massive conventional war, we want to have the ability to use nuclear weapons as a deterrent of an expansion of such a war. I think that blurs the line in a way that in the overall vision is not helpful. It's also argued that we would encourage a first strike by having no first use policy, but that's not a first use context, that's a second use context, which takes me to another issue. Should we really be in a strategic position in which we are considering the possible use on warning? Because that is a area where a lot of mistakes can occur. Let's just think about a little bit of the record in that area. 1979, training tape was put in for a Soviet attack, and the US for a moment thought we were under attack. And then information from our radar station said differently and prevented a big mistake. In 1980, on 2 different occasions, a failed computer chip suggested we were under attack. In September 26 of 83, a Soviet early warning satellite said that 5 missiles were aimed at the USSR, the Soviet Union, from the United States, based on a misreading of weather or sun's reflection off clouds. There was a Russian, Stanislav Petrov, who didn't believe the US would ever attack with only 5 missiles and interrupted the chain of command for possible response before those missiles would land. 1995, you have the incidents where the Russians again thought they were under attack when a Norwegian research rocket was misinterpreted. As we think about those things, I mean, we have a responsibility to make sure that we set a foundation so that that foundation can be built upon by subsequent generations to manage this enormous risk to humankind. So one of those is for the United States to reaffirm the no testing of nuclear weapons. No more underground or certainly above ground tests, but no more underground tests. Only North Korea is really testing weapons at this point. But it'd be good for the world to enter an era where no nation tests nuclear weapons. We should consider restarting open skies as a confidence building measure to promote trust and avert conflict. We should be looking then also at non-proliferation and the JCPOA. Restoration will be difficult. We have strengthened through our actions the hardliners in Iran, maybe the opposite of what would have been smart to do. Certainly Iran is in a position right now where they are reeling from the assassination of a top nuclear scientist. They have an election coming up in June. I don't know how all these things will interplay. I know that they just set the stage that there's no easy way to restore what has been dismantled. On the other hand, it's not impossible. It's certainly an area that the administration should be working on. I'm sure they will be working on. And one of the things they'll have to resolve are the issues of expiring limits on Iranian nuclear activities that were under the JCPOA and how to kind of create a framework that endures further into the future. We have North Korea. North Korea, I think the Biden administration needs to prepare for the possibility of provocative acts by North Korea, that they do, in the early days of the administration, conduct a nuclear weapons test, or they do conduct an ICBM test and put themselves back into the global conversation in that manner. Hopefully the Biden team, and I'm sure they will be thinking about that and developing a plan, hopefully to prevent it from happening and to respond. There's a lot of issues in this world of strategic nuclear weapons, certainly medium-range nuclear weapons, the disappearance of INF, tactical weapons, the inventory of warheads in Russia, which has been another issue the administration has been raising, of non-strategic warheads, and a lot of work on non-proliferation. This is really important work. So I just applaud the Arms Control Association for maintaining the dialogue over this, maintaining the prominence, engaging with public figures to educate them, to persuade them that this merits their time, to work towards sensible, effective policies that will prevent nuclear war on our planet. So I look forward to continuing to learn from all of you who are the experts. We need your knowledge. Every senator up here, every member of Congress is dealing with 100 issues at the same time. It's why it's so important to have you all raising this, educating us, laying out ideas, helping work through the pros and cons that might exist so that this receives the attention it so desperately needs. I hope that the point we're at right now, 100 seconds to midnight, if you will, under the Doomsday Clock, is one that we can say a decade from now, we had a very good decade, and that clock can be turned way back. So thank you all for inviting me to join you, and this is important work that you're doing.
Thank you so much, Senator Merkley. We have time for one question, and we do have a number of people here that want to help you to advance these goals. Do you have some specific suggestions for what we could do to help you and your colleagues in Congress move the agenda forward?
Well, Kathy, thank you. I really encourage you all to bring a bipartisan team from former administrations, 2 or 4 people to meet with every senator on the Foreign Relations Committee, the same on the House side, maybe also on the Defense Committee, to kind of raise 3 or 4 things that you think should happen, need to happen, could happen, and to create an ongoing dialogue with those members. That dialogue will enable them and their staff members to give you a call and say, well, how does this work? And wait, I've heard this other contrary opinion. What do you think about that? And therefore enable you to continue to educate folks and facilitate the process. But I think there's just, in this complicated world where there's so many demands on people's times, just important to have that direct connection with members on the key committees.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you so much, Senator Merkley, for speaking with us today and your very thoughtful and inspiring remarks, and also for your smart and steadfast leadership in the Senate, especially your work on the Foreign Relations Committee. And we should know that there is a great and a bipartisan tradition of arms control leadership from the great state of Oregon, speaking of Senator Hatfield and Congressman Kopetsky. So thank you again for taking that leadership forward.
Kathy, in that regard, can I tell you a short story?
Of course.
During the 1980s, Senator Kennedy and Senator Hatfield were involved in the nuclear freeze movement, trying to say we need to stop this just huge multiplication of nuclear weapons. Senator Hatfield was very involved in that, in part because he was one of the first Marines in to Hiroshima after the nuclear attack, so he'd seen firsthand the devastation. In the 80s, they planted a tree on the Capitol grounds that Kennedy suggested should be known as the Peace Tree in honor of their work on nuclear freeze movement. So there was a bipartisan tree, and this year I think the Capitol's architect will measure that tree and find it has, in the last short period, become the tallest tree on the Capitol grounds. So kind of in a biblical sense, maybe it will be a symbol of a very good decade to come in reducing the risk of nuclear war.
Oh, I love that story. Thank you so much for sharing it with us. So we all strive to be mighty trees for arms control. I am Kathy Crandall Robinson, and I'm the Chief Operations Officer here at the Arms Control Association. And I'm very glad that so many of you could join us today. Right now, we are going to go to our first plenary panel, one that I'm really looking forward to, diversifying and strengthening the disarmament movement. And this panel will be moderated by Lily Adams. Lily is one of our excellent members of the Arms Control Association Board of Directors.